Recently, a few people have reached out to me sharing that they can't remember their childhoods before a certain age, before the age of 13 or 12 or 10 perhaps. And they've wondered how they might better remember their childhoods. Some of them have shared that they've tried doing this or that, they've tried journaling a little bit, but it's not really opening the door to their memories. And so what might they better do? Well, in addressing this, I would like to first explore what I've observed with people, what I've observed in myself when I have had, or when I've seen others who've had blocked memories, when you just can't access stuff. The first thing that's most key that I think is that when memories are locked out of consciousness, usually they're just too painful. Usually there's a lot of pain buried below the surface, and it's scary. And that at some unconscious level that we have, we're keeping those things away because we don't know if we can handle it, or maybe we're really not ready to handle remembering those things. There can be a lot of overwhelm, a lot of anxiety, a lot of horror, a lot of sadness and terror and ugly things that go along with actually remembering what happened. What I've also seen is that people much more easily remember the good things that happen to them. I know a lot of people actually who say, oh yes, I remember my childhood very, very well. This is even going back to people I've known since they were little kids. And they share their memories of childhood with me, and they share all these good things that happened. And I was like, wait a second, I was there. And what I realize is they're just remembering the good things. And a lot of times people I've known very well, they block out the bad things. And I've seen this for myself too. I remember being 15, 16, 17 years old and thinking to myself, oh yes, I remember my childhood very, very well. And I had a pretty rosy picture of what my childhood was. My parents were good, they loved me, we had a lot of fun, family vacations, camping out, fishing, doing all sorts of wonderful things, road trips, fun, games, toys, enrichment, books, movies together. And so I never said, oh, I don't remember. But what happened to me is that as I started breaking away from them, becoming more independent in sort of a naturally, societally accepted way, going away to university and becoming an independent financial adult, I started having memories bubble up on their own. And what I started noticing with the memories I was having is they weren't so rosy and nice. They weren't raspberries and cream. The ugly stuff started coming up. Painful stuff. Conflict in my family, things that I knew were true because they'd happened 1,000 times. My dad just being out of control, being violent, my mom being perverse. I started recalling a lot more stories of my mom's drinking and drug use and lying and manipulation and my dad's rage and my parents' ugly fights. And the more I remembered, the more it went deeper and deeper. And it was like, this made it hard to go home. This made it hard to feel so warm and fuzzy toward my parents. This made my life very confusing. I remember talking about this with my friends who weren't thinking about the ugly things in their childhoods. And a lot of times they didn't give good feedback. Oh, why do you remember that stuff? Or they just went silent. I remember feeling sort of stigmatized by this. Why do you bring these things up? And feeling like I was weird somehow, or I was causing problems by bringing this up, or I was being negative. And it was like, I didn't socially fit in so well. Oh, I guess I could have gone to a therapist, but no way I was going to go to a therapist. I was forced to go to a therapist once, age 13 in school for fighting, and the woman was so uninterested in anything about me and my history of the terribly painful things I was going through that all she did is punish me and stigmatize me more, that I was like, nope, stay away from that area. And so I had nobody to share about my painful memories, my painful experiences. And so it was like hard to bring this up. And so when I think about people who say they can't remember their childhood, it's like, well, often they may not live in a world that's safe to bring this up, a social environment. They may not have intimate relationships with people who want to hear this. I know for myself, even in years past, not so long ago, I've been close to some people, especially I'm thinking of traveling when I'm not around my deepest, long-term, closest friends who can really understand and listen to me and hear me. When I'm in more conventional environments out in the world with people perhaps I've just met who are more normal people, and I start talking more about the things that are my real memories from childhood, the things that I talk about on this YouTube channel, much more freely and openly. People are like, ew, I don't want to hear this. Sometimes they say it directly. Sometimes they say, this is wrong, don't talk about this. But a lot of times the more conventional ways, they just kind of just shut down, pull away from me, give me that look like, are you off somehow? Why do you talk about this? And what I realize a lot of times from when I watch these people, when I watch their culture, is I am talking about things that actually happened to them. And yet they haven't dealt with it. They've forgotten it. They've blocked it out. So when people tell me they can't remember their life, a lot of times what I think is, they're normal. This is normal to not remember. To forget is normal. To forget, to block it out, to not even remember that you've forgotten, to forget that you've forgotten. This is called healthy in our world. And so when people reach out to me and say, I can't remember my childhood, it's like those people have already taken a step forward to realize at some level that it's off. There's something unhealthy about not being able to remember. And I consider that a good thing. So how does one begin to remember? Okay, someone recently said, I have been journaling, but it doesn't seem to open the doors. Well, what I would say is keep journaling. It might take a long time. Change your life if you can. Try to get around healthier people. Try to find people who are the type of people who do remember these things. Because that's what I found also. When I think it happened more in my 20s, but certainly, definitely into my 30s more and more and more, into my 40s for sure. When my closest, most intimate relationships were around people who did remember a lot of things, did remember a lot about their childhood, it was like unconsciously there was a tacit acceptance in remembering. It was like to remember was considered socially healthy, emotionally healthy, interactionally healthy. And I've seen that also. I've seen that with some people that I brought into my very personal life in different ways who didn't remember so well. And in the process of being close to me, and I'm not talking about therapy when I was a therapist, but it did happen in therapy also. I'm just talking about in general, in human interchange, when I've had more intimate, emotionally connected relationships with people where they didn't remember so much and they spent a lot of time around me. Somehow the message was transmitted to them that it was okay to remember, and they began to remember more because at some level they felt safer to remember. But I'm thinking about, well, what about people who don't necessarily have people around them who are sending them this overt or even a tacit message that it's good and healthy and lovely to remember? What can we do ourselves? And that's where I think of building a healthier, stronger internal boundaried relationship in our own lives. Having private space with ourselves. Journaling has been a big part of that for me, but also being out in nature. Being in an environment that's not ruled by screwed up human rules and regulations and laws and strange human attitudes that are so based on forgetting and blocking and accepting abuse and honoring screwed up parents. I found a lot of solace, even when I was a child, in just being in nature. I really think that helped me so much to have the foundation of having a self that someday would become much, much healthier by being alone in nature, a lot of time alone in nature as a child, also in reading books. I found a lot of solace and role modeling in literature, in fiction, when I was a child, and even as an adult, even though a lot of the fictional characters I saw, a lot of the fictional relational constellations were very screwed up, there were bits and pieces of healthiness, bits and pieces of characters and their relationships that were healthier than anything I had in my family. I became a part of this environment in my own imagination, and somehow this opened the door to me to remember. Also, to become financially independent, to not need my parents so much anymore, to work hard to develop new friendships. Okay, and some of my earlier friendships were perhaps in some ways closer to my relationships with my parents because that's all I knew. Some of my earlier relationships, my friendships, were more emotionally shut down, but at least those people weren't abusing me or treating me horribly like my parents were in so many ways. So just being in an environment where I was more honored and less violated allowed me to feel safer. Also for me, and this is a painful one, but by me not having children, I wasn't playing a lot of my stuff out, my unresolved emotional dynamics out in an unconscious way with my children from the power position. I've seen this with some people. When they have children, when they start playing out these dynamics, a lot of times it makes it easier to forget. It makes it easier to block things out, though in a contradictory sort of way. I've seen some people who have started to identify with the vulnerability of their children, and that has caused them to start to wake up. And they have said, oh my God, what happened to me? Who am I? How do I remember this stuff better? How do I participate in doing a study of my history, a study of my memory? That's a little confusing to me in a way, because then it sometimes feels like people are using their children to try to wake themselves up. I think it's much better if people can hold off on having children and figure that out without having to be in the power position over someone else, having to use their child to identify their own blocked, hurt childhood self. What I've seen for myself is by giving myself the safety of independence, of being away from my family. That was a big part of it. Getting away from my family of origin, not just emotionally, but physically, financially, geographically, relationally, not talking to my parents for long periods of time, feeling all the guilt and pain, all the different ways in which I was supposed to run back and make them happy, because it wasn't like I suddenly escaped from my family's system and became an adult who was really emotionally independent. I wasn't. Even though I was an adult and I looked like an adult, I didn't feel like an adult because I really wasn't an adult in a lot of ways. I knew it. If I asked myself, am I an adult? It was like, no, I wasn't, because I was still unconsciously trying to make my parents happy, especially when I was around them. And what happened as a result of that is I couldn't remember what had happened. So that's a big thing I've seen when people can figure out emotionally how to take distance, how to have better boundaries, sometimes really great boundaries, great emotional distance, even great geographical distance, relational distance from their families of origin. A message gets sent to the deeper self that it is now safer to remember things. I think for a lot of people, when they're close to their family in all sorts of different ways, there's like a little switch in their minds that says, don't remember this. That's bad. Forget that. Block that out. Because if you remember this, it's going to cause problems for you. Your family will reject you. I think a lot of people are still much, much, much more emotionally dependent on their parents, on their parents' memory even, than they realize. And when they can start to break that cycle, they can remember more. They can recall their own feelings more. They can recall their own deeper needs better. And so I think what I'd like to say in conclusion to someone who says, I can't remember what happened, I can't remember those feelings, I can't remember those memories, is I would say, try these different things, or try whatever of these things feel most right to you, and then give it time. Weeks? No, I'm thinking more like months, years. A lot of these things don't just open up quickly. The ice layer in ourselves that block us from being able to remember things, it takes a while to melt. If the ice is emotionally 3 feet thick, why would we expect it to heal in a matter of days or weeks? Wait, I tried doing this, this, and this. I journaled for 2 weeks every day, and I can't remember. I journaled for 2 months. Maybe journal for 2 years every day. Because this is what I believe. This is what I've seen. If we do a lot of these things for a long period of time, if we really set ourselves up to emotionally thaw out, these memories will come back. Because these memories want to come back. The deeper true self that is within every single person, the true needs that we once had, the true needs that are still living within us somewhere, this always wants to come back. This always wants to be true. This always wants to erupt. And if we position ourselves through doing all the different healing works that we can do, if we position ourselves to heal, eventually, it may take a long time, but eventually it will begin to happen, and eventually it will happen more and more. And eventually a real healing momentum will take over, and we will be stronger and better able to be able to handle all the painful feelings that are locked in with those memories.